So as we just heard, officials from South Korea and the United States are working to set a date for a summit between President Lee Jae-myung and U.S. President Donald Trump, which is set to be a key test for Lee's foreign policy. For more on this, we're joined by Professor Robert Kelly, Professor of International Relations at Pusan National University. Professor Kelly, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So security is expected to be at the top of the agenda when they do meet, and the United States will likely ask Korea to increase its defense contributions. How do you think the talks will play out?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think Donald Trump has made it pretty clear over many years now that he thinks that U.S. allies don't pay enough, that U.S. allies are free riders or cheap riders, they should do more. I actually don't think that critique really applies very well to South Korea, which does have pretty robust defense spending compared to other U.S. allies. But, Trump sort of sees U.S. allies in this kind of monetary, almost mercantile, mercenary sort of way. And so I would imagine that Trump will demand that what's called the Special Measures Agreement be revisited to lift Korea's payment. I believe right now the rough allocation is 50-50, and I would imagine that Donald Trump will ask for more, probably substantially more. He did in his first term.
Right. And could the upcoming summit change the role of American forces in any way that are stationed here? And could this align with a potential shift in Trump's foreign policy toward East Asian countries, as Washington tries to better counter China?
Yeah, I would imagine that Donald Trump will probably use the threat of a withdrawal or restructuring of U.S. forces Korea as a way to strong-arm South Korea into paying more. There is an argument that the U.S. military on the ground in Korea is so small that it actually acts more as like a hostage from the Chinese and North Korean missiles than it does as an actual fighting force. The U.S. sort of ground force here is pretty small, right? So I think Trump could sort of trade on that and argue, look, we could take these guys out anyway if you don't want to pay more. I would imagine that's kind of the informal quid pro quo that Trump is thinking of. Again, that's sort of the way he spoke the first time. That wouldn't actually be a massive catastrophe for the alliance, as I said. I mean, there is sort of an argument that the placement of U.S. forces here actually sort of weakens the American position because it opens the U.S. up to sort of missile strikes and stuff like that. There is an argument that the U.S. would actually have greater flexibility if its commitment here was solely air and naval. But of course, if you withdrew U.S. forces from on the ground, that would actually sort of like signal to a lot of countries that the United States was leaving. It might encourage capital flight out of South Korea. There's a lot of reasons why the South Koreans want to keep U.S. forces on the ground, even though they're pretty small. And so I would imagine in the end, the South Koreans will probably agree to the higher payment that Trump demands.
I see. In Seoul and Washington, they also recently struck a trade agreement setting the tariff rate at 15%. Could there also be further discussions on the details of the deal when Trump and Lee Jae-myung meet?
Probably, because Donald Trump is just all over the place on the tariffs, right? I mean, one of the strange things about Donald Trump when it comes to sort of alliance commitments is that he just doesn't really seem to believe that contract and sort of commitment are actually binding, right? I mean, this is now, the third trade deal the U.S. and South Korea have struck in 15 years, I think 18 years, right? There was KORUS. They're 1.0 right under Obama, and then it was revised, and then Trump came back in and revised it yet again, right? And so the KORUS agreement has actually been voted on twice, and now Trump came in and just threw all that out and sort of insisted on this deal. It's not even clear if a deal is actually binding. Is it a treaty? Is it going to be ratified by the relevant legislatures? I mean, it's pretty vague, actually, right? And this actually characterizes Trump's trade negotiations with the Europeans and Japanese, too. So it's not unique to what's happening. It's not unique to Korea. But since Trump is so unsettled on what he wants from U.S. trade partners, he changes his mind so often. I would imagine that if South Korea were to make some concessions, for example, on special measures, right, paying more for U.S. forces, that I would imagine Trump might be interested in some kind of tariff cut.
I see. And like you mentioned, Trump has made it clear he's putting American interests, over those of U.S. allies. How do you think the Lee administration should manage its alliance with the United States over the course of his 5-year term?
I think the best thing to do is the same thing that the Moon Jae-in government did, which is to give Trump what he wants for some kind of public relations takeaway. We know that Trump likes to have sort of good media. Give him something that sort of will allow him to go home and claim victory, to claim that he's sort of like got something significant out of the South Koreans, and then try to get Trump to move on. Try to get Trump not to pay attention to Korea, because the more he pays attention, the more he's going to say things like, we should pull out U.S. forces, we should pull U.S. air wings out, and things like that, right? Donald Trump doesn't really care that much about U.S. allies and U.S. commitments to U.S. allies. And so my sense is to divert his attention. The Japanese did this very well when Trump was president the first time, right? Abe Shinzo was prime minister at the time, and he gave Trump that golden golf club and a baseball hat, and it was all really ridiculous, but it worked really well. It sort of placated Trump, and then Trump moved on and worried about other things. And so that's what I would actually counsel. I would counsel the South Koreans give a little bit more to the Americans on tariffs, or on the trade deal, or on the special measures agreement. Get Trump the sort of smallish victory that he wants so he can claim it on Twitter, and then Trump's attention will go away, and then he won't actually shake the real foundations of the alliance. And that's the real threat, is that Trump might come in and say, I don't want to deal with you guys at all anymore. We're leaving. Right? Because Trump has leveled those kinds of threats at other U.S. allies, right? He wanted to invade Greenland and Canada. And that's the kind of explosion you want to avoid. I think the South Koreans should try to avoid, where Trump gets upset, he digs in his heels, and he creates a real alliance rift because he doesn't pay attention. He doesn't know any better.
I see. All right, Professor Cayley, I'm afraid I guess we'll have to see how that plays out. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.